Good evening. I'm Cindy Harris, Volunteer Services Liaison. Welcome to our February lecture, The Importance of Pollinators. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us. I speak on behalf of the Keep Grapevine Beautiful Board and Executive Director Kathy Nelson, just thanking you for your time, and we hope that you guys enjoy these webinars and this time together as much as we do. We have a lot of really great lectures planned for this year, and we hope that you guys will join us. So tonight, we are joined by Misty Adams and Kathy Nelson. They are going to present our lecture on pollinators this evening, and I'm going to begin by reading their bios. Misty Adams is our outdoor education coordinator. She's been teaching informal environmental science for over 15 years, and she is passionate about the outdoors and teaching others about the interesting things they can find right outside their doorstep. Misty's interests include native gardening, yoga, and making pottery. And then Kathy Nelson, she manages the planning, design, and construction of capital improvement projects for the Parks and Recreation Department in Grapevine, in addition to overseeing volunteer services. Kathy also serves as the Executive Director for Keep Grapevine Beautiful. She graduated from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor in Landscape Architecture and earned a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Arizona. She is a licensed landscape architect and a certified planner with over 16 years of experience in both private and public sectors in park and recreation planning and design. So before they begin, I want to just let you know, as usual, we have the Q&A open. The Q&A, you will ask questions. I will be able to see those questions as they populate. And then at the end, after Kathy and Misty have presented, they will answer your questions and we will do those live. So as questions arise, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A and we will answer them at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Misty now, and thank you so much again for joining us.
Hi, thanks guys. We're going to stop our video, but we're going to share our screen. So as Cindy said, my name is Misty Adams. I am the Outdoor Education Coordinator for the City of Grapevine Parks and Recreation Department. I joined the city at the beginning of May this year, so I'm relatively new, but I run all the Go Wild programs, and Go Wild is a program within the Parks and Rec Department that focuses on really all the outdoor education components, getting people connected with nature and feeling like they're comfortable looking out their back doors and going out there and exploring. So today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of pollinators. We'll just dive right in. And please, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. Hold on just a second, guys. I'm having issues with advancing the slide. Okay, so we're going to go over the importance of pollinators. So what is pollination? Pollination is simply the movement of pollen from a flower to another flower of the same kind of plant. This transfer is necessary for the production of seeds and fruits in all plants. This pollination can happen through wind, water, and also through animal actions, which we call animal pollinated plants. Now, this exchange is going to be a mutually beneficial relationship for both the animals and the plants. So the plants are going to provide a necessary resource for the organism, usually in the form of nectar or pollen. So they're getting food from the plant. And in exchange, the animal is going to move pollen from flower to flower. So they both benefit on both sides. So there's different types of animal pollinators: birds, mainly hummingbirds, bats. There's a few species of bats. And then insects are going to be your very large group of animal pollinators. Those insects are going to include bees, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, and wasps and hornets. So why are pollinators important? Animal pollinators are going to pollinate over 75% of flowering plants throughout the world. There's over 100 different crop species in America that depend on animal pollination. And this can be a value of over $15 billion annually. So it's very, very important for us as humans when we're eating and looking at our pantry. Those pollinators we rely on these organisms. So most natural ecosystems would collapse without these plant pollinators. And then some plants would even become endangered if their pollinator became endangered. So say you lost a certain butterfly that pollinated one specific plant, well, you could lose that plant as well. And then the most important thing on this list, I think, is that chocolate depends on pollinators. So we all love chocolate, and we need to have, I know I do. So what makes an important pollinator? What are some characteristics of a good pollinator? They need to be highly mobile. They need to be able to fly from plant to plant to pollinate. They need a way to have the pollen attached to their body. That's going to be through hair, scales, or even feathers. Then they're going to have a way to eat the pollen or the nectar. So they have to have an adapted feeding structure. We don't have an adapted feeding structure on our mouth. Insects and birds are going to have long beaks. Insects will have what is called a long proboscis, and it's like a long tube that comes out of their mouth part that is specialized for feeding on these flower structures. And then another really key important thing for pollinators is they need to visit a limited number of plant species. So they only need to visit a couple different types of plants. So they're transferring pollen from the same plant to the same plant to the next one. So you want to have the same going to the same. So the most popular and probably the most well-known are your bees. They're kind of the workhorse of the pollinator world, and most people are most familiar with bees. They're highly effective pollinators. They're very mobile. They have hairs that cover their bodies where the pollen can stick to them. And they even have specialized structures on their hind legs, which you can see here in this picture, that's actually going to hold on to the pollen and store it, called pollen baskets. And of course, they also have adapted feeding structures that allow them to drink nectar and eat pollen as well. So most of us are familiar with honeybees here on the very left-hand side. Honeybees are big colony forming bees. They're going to form colonies of about 15,000 bees. It's a lot of bees. And then big bumblebees. So those are the ones that we're all very aware of. Bumblebees form smaller colonies of only about 100 to 200 bees per colony. But native bees to Texas and North America are mostly solitary bees, which means that they don't live in big colonies. They live by themselves. So here on the right, I have a mason bee and a leafcutter bee. And these bees are either going to form, this mason bee forms a little hive or a nest in a hole in a tree or a piece of wood, or they can live in the ground. This is a leafcutter bee, and they actually call it a leafcutter bee because it goes and it has specialized mouth parts that it cuts leaves up and it takes it back to its nest, and it lines its nest with those leaves. So these bees live by themselves, but they make up the majority of pollination that happens in both agricultural and ecological systems. So without them, we would be in big trouble. We're just more familiar with these honey-making bees because of the honey and the large colonies that they form. Here is just an image I captured from the University of Texas at Austin, and these are all the different types of native bees you might find here. This mining bee here, he's a ground dweller, and you can see he makes a little hole in the ground. Here's that mason bee at the top right. He's formed, this is a bee box that you can purchase, and they will actually live in these little holes. They live by themselves, so not in big colonies. But this just shows you the variety of bees that are found just here in Texas. I believe that there are they have identified worldwide over 20,000 different native bee species, which is just amazing. So 20,000 different types of bees. I love this image here. This is of a world with and without bees. So here on the left-hand side is a plate, our breakfast plate, that it would look like if we no longer had bees present. So you'll notice that the oatmeal, it's missing the almonds, it's missing the dried fruit that they had inside on the other side. You don't have jelly for your toast. There's no salsa that's going on this omelet here, no berries, no orange juice or apple juice, and no apples at all. So we would have a very bland world and not very many fruits and vegetables if it weren't for bees themselves. Now I'm going to go through really generally just the other types of pollinators. I don't go into great detail, just a little kind of get you aware of the other pollinators that are present throughout the world. So we have bats. Mostly bats are going to be exclusively feeding on flying insects, but there are some bat species like this lesser long-nosed bat here that's found in Texas that has specialized nose structure, a long muzzle and tongue that can reach in and drink nectar and pollen. But most bats are going to feed on insects, but there are a few that are specialized in feeding on nectar and pollen, which will then, pollen would get attached to their hair structures here. So let me go back, oops, here on their face. And then when they move on to another plant, it'll transfer that pollen to another plant. These lesser long-nosed bats pollinate agave plants and cactus plants. Another well-known pollinator is going to be your hummingbird. So hummingbirds visit plants, and they have this very long beak that allows them to access the nectar way down in the bottom of a plant. So hummingbirds are kind of known for visiting tubular and red plants, but they really visit a wide variety. But they do prefer large, showy flowers with a lot of nectar. They don't have to be red, and they don't have to be tubular. A lot of the hummingbird feeders you find will be red, and they'll have the long little areas where they can visit, but they're just attracted to the actual nectar part of it. So sugar water itself will attract a hummingbird. Another popular pollinator is going to be your butterflies and your moths. And so they're a very, very big species that will pollinate plants. Here we have, on the very left-hand side, we have the Dakota skipper moths. We got a male and a female. We also have a red admiral butterfly here in the middle. One of my favorite butterflies here is your tiger swallowtail. We see those a lot around here. And then this is one of my favorite moth species down here on the end. And this is actually a hummingbird moth. These are very large in size for a moth species. They call it a hummingbird moth because it can actually hover, very similar to a hummingbird. So you may mistake it for a hummingbird if you don't know. And then another pollinator that you may not be aware of are flies. One way that you can tell whether it's a fly or not is if it has 2 wings or 4. So flies only have 2 wings. So this kind of looks like a bee, rural wasp because of this coloration. Well, that coloration is mimicry and it's to help it defend from other predators, but it's really just a fly. It doesn't bite or sting. But flies are also adapted at feeding on flowers. Another one that you may not be aware of are beetles. So beetles are one of the most diverse group of insects with millions of species worldwide. And some of those beetles have highly adapted feeding structures that allow them to feed on flowers. This soldier beetle here and this longhorn beetle here both are pollinating plants. And then one that you may not want to be a pollinator, but is very important for our ecosystem is wasp and hornets. So hornets are mostly going to provision their nests with other insects, and they're going to feed their young with those other insect parts that are in there or eggs. They will regularly visit flowers to collect the nectar as well. These here are tarantula wasps. Now what's different about these as compared to bees is that they're not very hairy. And so the pollen doesn't transfer very well, and they're much less effective pollinators, but they're still very important pollinators for the world. So you may see a hornet's nest on your back porch, but they are important. Maybe transferring it would be better than eradicating those wasps or hornets. And lastly, we talked a little bit about butterflies and moths already, but the monarch butterfly is probably one of the most recognized species of butterfly in the world. It's so well known because of its spectacular migration that it does from Canada through the United States down to Mexico. So it overwinters in Mexico. It's got very important overwintering grounds there, the big forest. And then as it migrates north, the United States, the agricultural land, provides nesting sites. So where all the milkweed is, and then in the wintertime it's in, or in this late summer, it's in Canada. So monarchs are actually not endangered yet, but their habitat and their overwintering grounds are seriously at risk. And so the reason, so they got deforestation and their overwintering sites in Mexico happening. But here in the United States, when we had the introduction of Roundup will actually clear everything away except for the crop species, including the most important plant for the monarch butterfly, which is that milkweed plant. And so with the use of milkweed, it has a significant decrease in milkweed plants that are growing throughout the United States. And so we're putting a priority for restoring these populations of monarchs throughout the United States and increasing that milkweed, planting throughout the United States. And in doing so, we're benefiting monarchs, but also all the other pollinator plants as well, and pollinator species. So what do pollinators need? Like all animals, a pollinator is going to need food and it's going to need shelter. Many of the pollinator species, their larva stage is going to need a specific narrow range of food, such as the monarch that I just talked about. That monarch butterfly is going to rely on milkweed. That is the only source that it eats when it's young. So whether it's a bird, a bat, or an insect, all pollinators need appropriate nesting sites as well. So the main sources are their food source is nectar and pollen, and a larva food source. It's going to be a nesting site, whether that be underground, like the bees, or it's going to need to be able to build a nest somewhere, and somewhere to winter, the overwintering sites. An overwintering site here in the United States would be your leaf litter in your yard, your leaf litter, your limbs that fall, the twigs, and untilled soil. A lot of these insects and these pollinators are going to be living below ground in the winter, somewhere to keep warm. So if you're thinking all the leaves have fallen in your yard and you want to clear them all out and have this beautiful cleared out yard, you're not benefiting your pollinators in your yard because you're taking away that potential location for them to overwinter and stay warm and protected during the cold season. So, but why are they in decline? Why are pollinators, they're important, but what's happening to them? So we talked a little bit about habitat loss and fragmentation. So they're losing vital habitat due to urbanization, also deforestation in Mexico and different areas. Another big reason we're going to have a decrease in pollinators is invasive species. So if you have a particular plant species that comes in that's invasive, it can outcompete your native species. But remember back at the very beginning of the presentation, I said many pollinators only visit a select few plants. And if those select few plants are no longer there, then they're not going to be able to survive. So it's a if invasive species come in, take out the native plants, that then takes out the native pollinators, and it's just an endless cycle. Pesticides can also be a problem. It can be direct or indirect. So it can be directly killing the pollinators or indirectly killing the plant sources and their food sources that then they're having problems. You can have diseases like the colony collapse disorder, which is the disease that's coming in and taking out some of the honeybees. And then you can also have parasites like mites that can come in and kill pollinators. So what can we do? Well, we can plant a garden. We can plant a native garden. We can put up these really cool nesting boxes. So this is just one I pulled off Google, a little picture of it. These are available for purchase online, but you can also just drill holes in a piece of wood, and that is going to give a bee nesting box. All those solitary bees, it's going to give them a location to live. So you can put up some bee nesting boxes. You can provide some overwintering habitat. So remember that you can not rake up your leaves, and you can leave them on the ground until spring comes, and that provides that space for those pollinators to survive. And then limit your pesticide use. Follow the instructions on the bottle and only use when necessary. Some tips for creating a good pollinator garden. You want to choose plants that flower at different times of the year. So you're going to want to have some that come up in spring, some that come up in fall, in the beginning of summer, at the end of summer, and then even in fall. So you want to have continuous flowers going on in your garden to give food sources for those pollinators. You want to plant in clumps rather than single plants. You want to provide a variety of color and shapes to attract a wide variety of pollinators. And always choose native whenever possible, because those native plants, again, attract the native pollinators that can be their only source of nectar and pollen for both the adults and the caterpillars or the larva stage. So that is the importance of pollinators and kind of briefly what you can do. As the Go Wild program coordinator, I have a lot of things that I'm doing to get people outdoors and engaged in nature. I have a few listed here. So we now do monthly hikes. This next monthly hike is going to be the second Saturday in February. Is that right? Or we did February? March. March is coming up. This last week threw me off. But we'll be doing an iNaturalist monthly hike. So we'll be learning about iNaturalist. But on those monthly hikes, we focus on whatever's happening during the season. So these upcoming hikes are going to be focused on the things that are blooming, the things that are buzzing around. It's springtime, lots of different changes are going to be happening. So that's what our monthly hikes are going to be focused on. We also have Go Wild Discovery Trunks. These are hands-on field trips in a box. These are for people with children at home that are trying to figure out how to teach them. They may not normally homeschool, but now in the time of COVID, they're figuring out what to do. These have a wide variety of curriculum involved in them, but pollinators are part of that. We also have a monthly homeschool discovery program. This program covers a wide range of topics, but also includes pollinators and what's happening with our next program is going to be about spring. And so we'll be talking about pollinators then. We do after school programs. And of course, I love to collaborate with Keep Grapevine Beautiful, such as this lecture series. So I'd like to thank the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services because they helped with the photos and the factual material for this presentation. I'm now going to pass the presentation over to Kathy Nelson, and she's going to talk about what the city is doing to kind of help out these pollinators.
Thank you, Misty. Appreciate that. Yeah, so as part of our lecture here, would like to talk a little bit about our roles to support the well-being of pollinators. And I would like to say thank you again for everyone being here tonight, especially on a pleasant night like tonight. Unlike, I just can't believe what it was like just a week ago. And I'm very thankful that y'all are here with us, and I hope you're able to progress through any kind of hardships that you had, whether it was personal, work, family and such. Just thank you so much for helping others out and joining us tonight. And I hope this is a little positive note for you to help you get through whatever you may have remaining. And thank you, Misty is just telling me, take your mask off, as Misty is in the back of the room. So please forgive me for that muffled moment. So again, I'd like to share with you information about our roles in supporting the well-being of pollinators. And I'd like to first start off with the role of the Parks and Recreation Department. So, and I want to just start very basic, our mission. And our mission is to enhance the quality of life of the citizens of Grapevine through the stewardship of natural resources and the responsive provision of quality leisure opportunities. And we just place great value in being good stewards of the natural environment. I mean, we currently manage over 2,400 acres of parkland, which approximately there are 1,000 acres that we have identified as environmentally sensitive. And that means that this land is set aside to provide for and protect our native habitats and to minimize improvements of trails and interpretive areas. So we realize that the conversion of our native grasslands and timbers to urbanized and highly programmed parkland have claimed millions of acres of wildlife habitat throughout Texas and have resulted in measurable population declines for wildlife and pollinators dependent on these habitats. So our plan in supporting the well-being of pollinators is to designate and utilize public lands best suited for restoring native habitats, reconstructing native prairies, and planting native and adaptive plants to enhance landscape areas. So I want to quickly talk about landscape enhancement, prairie restoration and habitat, prairie reconstruction and habitat restoration. And I want to highlight a project for each one of these topics. So for the landscape enhancement, which is really the formal planting just for visual appeal, I'd like to talk about landscaping along the highways. And one of the large projects that we've been working on is the Green Ribbon project that is funded through the Texas Department of Transportation through a grant program. The purpose of the Green Ribbon project is to reduce the impact of pollution through planting native and adapted trees and plants in the highway rights of way. We also take it a little step further and ensure that we're planting pollinator-friendly plants. And we'll talk about that here shortly. For prairie reconstruction, we have partnered with the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to restore about 10 acres of prairie that benefit the native grassland birds and pollinators. And this project will contribute toward the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Region 2's monarch butterfly conservation strategy and action plan. and support the June 20th, 2014 presidential memorandum for creating a federal strategies to promote the health of butterflies, bees, birds, bats, and other pollinators. Then habitat restoration, and that is to enhance existing natural areas that have experienced some disturbance with additional native plantings and a revised maintenance program. And the project I'd like to highlight tonight for you is Meadowmere Park. So firstly, talk about landscape enhancements with the Green Ribbon Project. So what you see on the left side of your screen is the master plan for our corridor landscape enhancements. And you'll see that we began our phase 1 in 2015, and that's kind of right in the center of the map. And we have just completed phase 5 in 2020. So just, you can see Grapevine Lake at the top end of that map. And you can see where we have phase 1 through phase 5 labeled. And so all the way from the north end of the city on FM 2499. And then the phase 5, which we just completed, is kind of there at the merge of 121 and State Highway 360. And you think that highway plantings aren't all that important, but when I calculated all the acreage that we had planted and also, sowed some bluebonnet seeds along the grassy areas, equated to a little more than 40 acres. And so that is something that will make an impact on the pollinators in this area. And so when you start adding up all those acres that the communities could enhance with these kind of projects, I mean, it definitely adds up and can benefit the pollinator communities. So we've listed there below how many native and adaptive trees we've planted. That's 825 over the past 5 years. This insane number of 15,000 plus native and adaptive shrubs, and then 44,300 native or adaptive ornamental grasses. And when I say ornamental grasses, those are kind of they are your bunch grasses, but they're planted in beds. They're not planted naturally or seeded. And, it's still for, visual appeal. We're trying to make a statement when people enter into Grapevine. But some of these are natives, like some of your muleys. We do use some blue grama, but then we also use like weeping love grass, which is not native, but at the same time, it's adaptive. And here are some images of those right-of-way plantings that you can see, and some of the quality of I was trying to capture some pollinators out there along the right-of-way. And so these are original pictures out there with the common blue butterfly and the monarch. And you can see there on the bottom left is you can have some abelia plants with some Mexican feathergrass. I believe that's some Russian sage. Some of those shrubs that you see are vitex, those two short ones, and then in the foreground, just barely to the left, are desert willow. Top right, I believe that's some Russian sage, and then in the middle there, where you see some bees, is a Mexican bush sage. And then to the right, that's there along FM 2499, heading north out of the city, and you can see some small Texas sage, and then some weeping love grass, and then some abelias, and then some more ornamental grasses, and then I can't tell what is further down, but usually it's native or adaptive. And believe it or not, these pollinators, they find their way, and it's even with all the cars going, 55 plus beside you. It's a joy to walk out there amongst these plants and know that, yes, they're benefiting from what is being done along these roadways. And it's, you know, it's unused acreage, and we might as well put it to good use. So on to prairie reconstruction. This is an aerial of Park. And with the help of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and their partnership program, they've helped us and guided us along with Texas Parks and Wildlife to help reconstruct a prairie. And this is about 4 acres plus or minus. We began this in 2017. And it has been, I will have to say, a little more difficult, a little more of a challenge than I thought. And the reason being is because of the Bermuda grass, the invasive Bermuda grass. And that's why a lot of trying to reconstruct some of these prairies in parklands that have already been, you know, manicured and have been sodded, or they're up against neighborhoods where Bermuda grass is prevalent. And, you know, back in the day, Bermuda grass was it. That's helped with helping with erosion quickly. If you had a new project going on, that's what you planted because it was going to establish quickly. Well, we know the harm of that. And so, but it has been a complete challenge to eradicate large areas of Bermuda grass here in Park. So it's kind of like we try to remove invasives, we collect seeds, we plant seeds and transplants, then we try to remove invasives again, then we rinse, wash, and repeat again. So not exactly in that order, all that mixed up. But anyway, it's late, I apologize, but it's repetitive, ongoing. And so that's why if you go out to Park, you'll see a large swath where it's been mowed. And that is where we have some large areas of Bermuda that we are trying to eradicate. And the only way we can do that is by removing anything around it and then trying to remove it that way. And then, so it has taken a little longer, but we do have some good establishment there on the west end of the park. And then the plant list here is a guide that we use that was recommended by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And that was to use the following list of grasses and to plant the seed 12 pounds per acre. And then supplement that with 9 pollinator plants. You know, those 3 that were fall, spring, and summer. And so the next slide will kind of show you the list of what we have out there. So we kind of went a little heavier on the pollinators than what was recommended. But you can see that what started is the native grass seeds. And some of these, and some of y'all were, might have been involved with some of these transplants. We did have a lot of transplants out there versus just seeding. But this will be available for you if you'd like to kind of go back to this list, because it's also a good list for those pollinator plants if you'd like to start something in your yard that Misty had recommended. So the next slide is going to show you all of the hard work leading up to today and all the different groups. And I was talking about the Bermuda grass being invasive, but there on the top left is a crew that removed a lot of the giant ragweed out. So we're still removing invasives, and then we're just doing a lot of planting and seeding. And currently we're just repeating on trying to get rid of some of that Bermuda grass. It'll be interesting to see what comes up this spring. So the next one is Lake Point Park. Some of y'all may not be familiar with this particular area, but it's located north of Dove Loop Road, just east of Oak Grove. And it was some acreage that was donated from the Lake Point development there on the south side of Dove Loop Road. And this is also about a 4-acre lot, and we began just this past summer trying to remove invasive species again. And again, I don't know how, but in the middle of that plot, there is a mass of Bermuda grass. That's probably about an acre in size. So we are coordinating and working with the fire department. And so we have a planned prescribed burn for February, although the weather has kind of put a kink in a lot of things. So I'm not quite sure whether we'll get that in February, and we'll kind of play it by ear depending on what's growing up and out in March. That might be a little too late. But anyway, for that, since there isn't residential too close by, and if we can get some south winds, it would be a area where we can use prescribed burn and see how that fares as compared to what we have at par, which we will just kind of mow every three years instead of burning. So it'll be a good kind of way to see how one does over the other when you use burn method over mowing. So we will sow seed in the fall if we can get a handle on that Bermuda grass. And there's also some other invasives in there, and we'll just handful those. And then the plant list will be the same as what was on the couple of slides that we used for PAR. So this is going to be kind of exciting to see how this turns out. And so this kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea of what's on those 4 acres. As you saw in the aerial, there is a little bit of Grapevine Lake comes up there, and then a tributary that goes underneath Dove. And so we had this turtle. He got extremely stressed when I got up close. I really couldn't tell with all the mud that he had on him, but he obviously comes up there and visits. So there's probably a lot of other wildlife in this area. They're on the bottom, well, top right, that dense green is kind of where the Bermuda and some small ragweed is just heavy patch of about an acre. And then your timber line there in the background. Okay, so looking on for habitat restoration, and this is an aerial image of Meadowmere, and they're highlighted in the green are the areas that's been delineated back in 2017 for those areas that, hey, we need to stop mowing, and we need to start allowing the native grasses and plant life to grow. And so and it's amazing what has already been accomplished just by, changing our mowing habits. And so that's really what we're doing when we talk about the habitat restoration. We don't have to worry about many invasive species. It's acreage that hasn't had a lot of other plants introduced, but maybe just, maintenance has not been beneficial to recreate some of the habitat that was already there. So in addition to planting native plants, we have been planting native shade and understory trees that can withstand wet feet, because this area does flood, and we have those heavy floods that seem to be reoccurring almost every 2 years. And so that's, pecan, cedar elm, sycamore, roughleaf dogwood, and possum holly. And here are some pictures of folks helping us out there. Again, transplanting some plants and planting trees. And we've just, with Go Wild and Happy to Help, we are able to have some folks come out. And you can see where sometimes we plant up into the timber areas, and then you can see in the background that especially where that pecan is being planted is kind of on the edge of an area that's been delineated where you don't have any, it's a no-mow area. So you can already see it taking shape. So now that we finished talking about some of the projects that we've been working on, I just want to mention a few partnerships and programs that the Parks and Recreation Department is involved with. And you've already heard from Misty about the Go Wild, and that is a wonderful education piece for everyone involved, and we are excited to see it grow. And so I want to first start off with the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. We first pledged as a city in 2016, and the program took off in 2015. And they've kind of, in the Mayor's Monarch Pledge is administered by the National Wildlife Federation. And it's, you know, for cities and municipalities and other communities across all of North America to commit and create healthy and sustainable habitat for the monarch butterfly and pollinators, while educating residents about how they can make a difference. They've kind of revised their program, and they've kind of tweaked their action items. So we repledged, as all other cities that are interested in this program, in 2021. And I went ahead and listed what those action items that we chose as a city and thought that we could attain those goals. And some of them we already do, and I'm just going to highlight a few. And the second one down, we engage with Grapevine Garden Club, and they have just, well, they're just awesome. But one of the things is urging folks to plant native milkweed and nectar producing plants. And that's one of the things that as Parks and Rec Department, we haven't pushed that. And as much as where we're seeing the Mayor's Monarch Pledge is wanting to go, and just the emphasis on providing that food source for the caterpillars. So that's one thing that we're going to start focusing on more, is planting native milkweed. The second thing is just, hey, we need to revise and maintain our mowing programs, and make sure that our maintenance crews understand this, and then also integrate, you know, milkweed and more nectar plants in our planting programs. So you'll see some of this overlap with another program with Bee City USA here shortly, but I want to go over a little more action items on the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. The other one, again, you'll see there, plant that milkweed. So at the end of this presentation, I do have a source for getting milkweed. And those of you that are listening in that are from the Garden Club, you have your sources as well. And so would really like to kind of put our heads together and collaborate and try to just get more milkweed out in the Grapevine community. And then last but not least is just to integrate our commitment and actions into our park and recreation master plan, and creating these policies that will be consistent through the future. And so you see some of the logos with the CVB, since there's such a big part in Butterfly Flutterby and the Grapevine Garden Club. And then of course, the Monarch Watch, which is also a big part of getting some of these, this is how a lot of the cities can get some free milkweed. And we try to do this every year through the Monarch Watch, is trying to get the milkweed. And then of course they have their own market that anyone can access and buy milkweed through. So the Monarch Watch is also a big partner in what we do, as well as the, you know, Grapevine Botanical Garden and Traceworthy, also in all of what he plants out there in the botanical gardens to help for supporting the pollinators. So next is Bee City USA. We have just recently become an affiliate of Bee City USA. through a resolution back in May. And Bee City USA is promotes the well-being of bees and other pollinators, and it's administered by the Xerxes Society. And they also have some action items, but there, as you see under the notes, that the Parks and Recreation Department is the sponsor of the Bee City USA. And then that Keep Grapevine Beautiful, the board stepped up and said, you know what, we'll be the facilitator for this, which means they're responsible for hosting these educational events, which tonight is one of those. And then creating more educational programs or partnering with other folks and providing education throughout the community about the importance of pollinators and what you can do to support them. But for these action items, they're at the bottom. One of the important ones is to develop and implement a program to create and expand these habitats. So you see, we just started doing some of that with the prairies and the right-of-way plantings, but we need to be a little bit more consistent in developing a program, again, that will continue us into the future. And then also I want to highlight that we do have a web page on the City of Grapevine Parks and Recreation Department, and there's the link for that. And there's some other links that'll be provided in this presentation, and you can just ask Cindy for a PDF of this presentation so you can have the links, or maybe she can send them out separately. But as the action items continue, wanted to highlight the pest management plan, to create and adopt an integrated pest management plan. So, you know, Misty was talking about how important it is to try to limit the pesticide use, and how damaging pesticides can be to the food source and habitat for pollinators. So we understand that the importance of that, and we are trying to incorporate that into our maintenance within our parks and park maintenance division. And then last but not least, Misty went over a little bit, and I would like to kind of continue. What is your role in supporting the well-being of pollinators? Volunteer with us, come out and join us during some of our some of those happy to help days. Concentrate on removing invasives, or planting native plants out in our prairie reconstruction areas. The link to volunteer is listed there. You can also create your own pollinator habitat, and there's a link to the parks page, which can take you to some of the Bee City USA resources. There is the National Wildlife Federation Garden for Wildlife, I think, has some pretty good information on that. And then there is the Shop Milkweed Market link as well. And last but not least, you know, support through educating yourself, which thank you for joining us today to try to learn a little bit more and get some more resources on better understanding kind of the peril the pollinators are in today. And when you're out and about, if you are already familiar with iNaturalist, I encourage you to become familiar with that, or come out with one of these, with Misty on one of her nature hikes, and she'll teach you how to use iNaturalist to record your observations. And when I say record, you know, if you see pollinators, take pictures of that, find out what it is, and pollinator plants. That goes into a large database that helps us better understand what kind of wildlife and habitat that we have in Grapevine. And then, of course, if you want to sponsor or learn more information about what we're doing with some of the projects or how to help, you can go to keepgrapevinebeautiful.org. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. And I'm going to now stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Kathy and Misty. We have a few questions that have been posed during the presentation that I would like to ask. So I want to ensure that you both can hear me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so Linda had a couple of questions. One of them was related to bees. I'm sorry, to bats. Let's start with bats. So we understand that bats are pollinators. And so do you encourage residents to attract them, like to, you know, build a bat box in their backyard? Or is that something that we prefer for parks to do that? Or what? How would you encourage, if any way, that would you encourage residents to attract bats?
If a resident has the space for a bat house in their backyard, I don't know the specific requirements for a bat box. I would definitely encourage putting one in your yard. It's kind of like putting a bluebird house in your yard as well. So you just have to look up the requirements for a bat box and make sure you have the appropriate open space and coverage in your yard to have one. But I would definitely encourage that if you have that available. Yeah.
So bat box, so information about bat boxes, that would be something that you could Google or maybe go to Marshall Grain. Is that correct? And find more information about bat boxes or how you might attract bats. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would definitely look it up on Google. I don't know about Marshall Grain. I'd have to look into it. I can also get some information on that and send it out to you, Cindy, that you can share with them as well.
Wonderful. Okay, Linda also wants to know, and this is a great question, do all bees sting?
I don't think so, but I'll have to look up. I mean, there's 20,000 different bee species, so I don't know if all of them have the ability to sting. I mean, it's a protection mechanism, so it may be something they all have the ability. Now, whether they're aggressive or not, I don't know. And the ones that nest in the ground and in the cavities are not territorial and they're not defending their nest, so they may not have to have that ability to sting. So that's a big question for as many species as there are. So
We'll get back to you on that one.
I can look it up and see if there's a selection that don't sting. Maybe there's a not a species, but a genre of bees that don't. But I don't know the answer to that because there's so many bees. So.
All right. Lyle wants to know that if we wanted to introduce milkweed into the garden or our beds at home, are there seeds available? And Kathy, I know you referenced that in your slideshow, but if you could remind folks where they might go or how we might be able to get milkweed as residents.
I would say just on the seed topic, milkweed takes a very specific stratification process. And so that means
Transplant.
it's got to go through a certain period of pull and kind of rough up. It's very hard to get milkweed growing from seed. And so if you can find a source that actually is already a plant, so just a transplant, there's a couple different garden centers that do sell it. I know Painted Flower Farms in Denton will have milkweed plants that you can plant. I don't know if Marshall Grain has it normally at
She gets as much milkweed as she can.
I bet it goes quick.
Tell me what time of year, but I know that she does get milkweed and has it for a limited amount of time as a plant. So Kathy, what time of the year does she usually buy that or have that? Do you know?
I'm not sure when usually springtime.
Okay.
I mean, usually around April, May is when you need to plant that. And the link that's in the presentation is through the Monarch Watch website, that they have their own market that you can buy milkweed plants. And they also can help you recognize which ones you need to buy. And of course, green milkweed works here, but there's also a couple of others that they can recommend by the region for which you live.
Good.
You can also look out for the Native Plant Society sales that they have early spring and beginning of summer. They'll usually typically have milkweed the garden club will have a sale coming up in, I believe, April, and I'm sure that there's gonna be some milkweed there. It may be limited supply, so it'd be first come, first served, but look out for your local garden sales as well, that'll have them.
Yeah, if anyone's, any of the attendees from the Grapevine Garden Club, and if y'all are aware whether you're gonna be selling milkweed or not, if you could just put in the chat, yes or no, that would be helpful. Or if you don't know, maybe encourage them.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so let's see. Lucy had a great question. She wants to know if we have any classes on planting techniques or types of plants so that she can learn how to plant these native plants in her yard.
We don't have plant classes, but I will look and see if the Grapevine Garden Club has any upcoming classes on that, because they do have them frequently.
Yes.
I mean, if she's interested in, and Lucy, if you're interested, definitely look into getting involved in the Grapevine Garden Club, because they have webinars and monthly meetings where they always have a guest speaker talking about a particular plant or how to plant, and they always take recommendations on speakers. So if you're interested in that as well, the Grapevine Garden Club would be a great organization to join. But I'll look and see if they have any upcoming classes on how to plant.
Right, and that may be something that we can, as Keep Grapevine Beautiful, that we can partner with the Garden Club or the Native Plant Society to create or to, post a class at nighttime or on the weekend, what have you, if there's a need for that. But there are a lot of opportunities, whether it's Texas Parks and Wildlife. You can find classes and those kinds of things. If you just Google it locally, you might be able to find something close by, but who knows? Maybe we'll have one here shortly. Maybe Cindy can post one for a future lecture.
And it looks like Karen Rice just responded, Cindy, about the milkweed for the garden club that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They do try to get milkweed for sale, so.
Yes. So Lucy, any attendees that are not part of Garden Club right now, we want to encourage you guys, go to their website. They have their meetings during the day, but that doesn't mean that you can, and if you're not a master gardener or a gardener, or you can't attend the meetings, that doesn't mean you don't want to be a part of their club. Their club is very accessible. They have all types of gardeners. Even if you're just interested in plants, they're a great resource and a great group. And so they've been very good friends to Grapevine Parks and Rec and Keep Grapevine Beautiful. And so they have resources on their webpage, but also wonderful plant sales twice a year that will, like Misty said, and Karen chatted, that will include milkweed. Let's see. And so Lori had a question. What kind of conditions does milkweed need? Does it need full sun? Is a shaded area okay? Is it kind of fussy? I mean, what kind of conditions does it need to thrive?
It needs full sun for sure. It is not a shade tolerant plant. So full sun, it's pretty drought tolerant once it gets established. Yeah, you gotta get it established.
So yeah, you can't plant it and walk away. So it does need some frequent watering at the beginning for that. But
Great.
once it's in the ground and has a nice sunny spot and you took care of it for the first year, it should keep coming back.
very much so. And I want to share, I don't know if the others can see, but Gordon Scruggs had mentioned there that milkweed is available at the North Central chapter of the Texas Native Plants in Arlington on May 8th, 2021. And for information, you can email info@txnativeplants, all one word, .org.
Wonderful. I'm going to see if I can put that. I'm going to try to post it somewhere. I will have that information available to the attendees about the native plant sale. Also, if you guys have registered for this webinar, you will receive information about our following webinars. If you have additional questions about this one, feel free to jump in our Q&A right now and ask questions if you'd like to. be sure you fill out our survey. Let us know how we did, how you felt about tonight's lecture. And I believe there's also an opportunity for you to give us ideas of the content that you might be interested in seeing in the future. So our March lecture is Wednesday, March 24th. And we will have a residential irrigation expert do a residential irrigation, lead a residential irrigation class. And he will talk to you about the best way to help maintain our North Texas lawns. He is also, his company is part of the irrigation evaluation program that the city provides. And so if you want him to come out and do a complimentary residential irrigation evaluation, he'll be able to do that. So you'll have the link, I believe, at the end of this webinar. You will be provided the link to register for next month's webinar. Let me see one quick question. Oh, yes, the webinars, all of our webinars will be available to review, to watch and review later. So what I do is we record all of tonight's lecture, and then I will edit it and then post it on our social media on Facebook. And then you will also, I believe that I have been sending a link to the video out to attendees as well. And so there'll be a couple of ways for you to view it. We also have a Keep Grapevine Beautiful YouTube channel. And so that's where our past lectures and webinars have been posted. And so we're also, I'll wrap up. We have a new Keep Grapevine Beautiful website that's coming soon. And that's where you'll be able to have loads of information. We're really excited about that. So be looking for that in the next few months. So I really want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you, Kathy and Misty, for sharing time with us, and for all of our attendees and joining us. And I hope that we can see you in March as well. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.